right, everybody, and welcome to the Dissecting Fiction podcast. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Kutlick.
And today on the podcast, we're going to cover the Batman films of Christopher Nolan, also known as the Dark Knight Trilogy.
The Batman Christopher Nolan films are pretty significant, not just for comic book movies, but culturally in general, because this came out right after Spider-Man 1, which is one of the best comic book movies. And the Nolan Batman movies are legitimately just like great movies in their own right, and they really redefine like superheroes as a whole.
Yeah, Batman Begins even comes out a little bit after Spider-Man 2, which even itself was a huge improvement on Spider-Man as far as storytelling goes. But the whole history of this production is kind of interesting. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of stuff that's going on at Warner Brothers right now. Or at least the way they're perceiving it. The story really starts around like 2000. 2000 would have been the year that the fifth Batman movie came out that would have been in line with, I guess at that point, not so much the Burton ones, but the Schumacher ones that would have been supposedly Batman triumphant.
This all came out of the wreckage of the Schumacher movies, which really harmed comic book movies. And a lot of blockbusters in general, and the whole studio in actuality, even though it bombed, it wasn't like a Heaven's Gate bombing, or like, and a multiple other like movie franchise bombing. It wasn't like The Mummy or something. It was just very looked down upon by pretty much everybody.
Yeah, especially after, people forget Batman Forever was really successful, and though it was goofy, it just did not reach the utter ridiculousness of ridiculousness, I guess, of Batman and Robin. Which now is really fun to watch because it's just insane. But it scared Warner Brothers a little bit because they had this thing that was going so strong throughout the 90s, and now they didn't know what to do. But around 2000 to, say, 2002, there were really three Batman projects that were pretty heavily in development. A Batman Beyond film from Paul Dini, Neil Stephenson, and Boaz Yakin. I don't think I've ever heard it said out loud. I've only read it. Yak. We're going to go with Yakin. Yakin would have been director and had worked on a rewrite from that first Dini script. The other one that gets a lot more attention is the Batman Year One script, which was written by Frank Miller along with Darren Aronofsky. The thing everyone talks about, and we're going to talk about it too, is it was not even Batman Year One that Frank Miller had written in the comics. It was going to have a mechanic Alfred and various other like twists to the Batman story. But that all came from something that had been floating around as the idea of doing a Batman origin. Following the Aronofsky-Miller version, the Wachowskis had a shot at it, and Joss Whedon also had a pass at it, and sort of none of those scripts ever really came together. The last of the three, and the one that it sounds like from all the research I did came very close to getting made, was a Batman vs. Superman movie written by Akiva Goldsman with Wolfgang Peterson, who was supposed to have done the Superman reboot, which also didn't happen. But this is where Christian Bale first pops up as a candidate for Batman.
It's weird seeing all these credits kind of listed off because this is kind of who's who of the late 90s and the early 2000s. Like, Josh Whedon was just coming off of Buffy. Wachowski's siblings were just coming off The Matrix. Afronsky was just a rising indie star at this point. These are pretty bold steps to pick and pretty shows that they want to do a pretty radical departure early on. Even from just like dialing back the Schumacher ridiculousness. They wanted to do something big.
Yeah, and it's always that you never run faster than when you're being chased, and that's how Warner Brothers felt. Mm-hmm. You know, there's definitely this idea of, okay, they're watching X-Men movies and Spider-Man movies do incredibly well by this point.
Right, that's all coming out at this time, too. I was just thinking about Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2.
Warner Brothers feels like they should be on top. And they end up going with Christopher Nolan, who, up to that point, was arguably an indie director. I think
he did Memento. He did...
Insomnia would have been before that.
Yeah, he wasn't on The Illusionist. That was like 2005.
He's not Illusionist. He's the Prestige.
Prestige?
They came in the same year.
Illusionist and Prestige are both magician movies. It's not a problem to get them confused.
So anyway, the future director of The Prestige, Christopher Nolan, comes on to the project. It sounds like he more came onto the project probably in late 2002. It's announced in January of 2003, meaning there was something there. He is almost immediately paired with David Goyer, who at the time would have been working on or just coming off of JSA at DC. This is something that I thought was interesting. Nolan has a lot of interviews out there. He did like press junkets, things like that, before these movies came out. One of the toughest things when you're researching these movies is trying to find like real solid stuff from him. He doesn't really say anything if he's not directly asked. And I think this is where you start to see the beginning of this trend that he continues throughout the production of all these movies, where he does keep a level of secrecy even after the movie comes out. We'll get into some of the stuff we know about Begins and Dark Knight Rises as we go. But even like at this point, it was really hard for me to find a lot of really like interesting commentary about the movies that wasn't sort of surfacey. The one thing that I did find was that Nolan specifically brought Goyer in because though Nolan had like a pretty good base knowledge of Batman, he wanted someone who was like a comic book guy. He wanted someone who knew a lot of the specifics, and if Nolan started go off base, could correct him. I can't really think of any other time I've heard that playing into a production.
I mean, they kind of do that now, but that's just kind of out of...
Well, it's more oversight than anything else. Like, Kevin Feige might come in and tell you, no, we're not going to do it that way, but it's not a director willingly acquiescing to changes because their co-writer wants them to. This isn't the only thing Nolan does that's pretty special. First of all, this continues with all his films, Nolan never utilizes a second unit. He shoots everything himself. From commentary from those who have worked with him, he has a very frenetic style of shooting and just kind of keeps moving through the story and knows what he wants to do and does it. And I think the last little bit of this is something I tracked down before we really get into the meat of the movie. There was a conscious decision to take Zorro out of the origin. And the reason for this, and this is from an interview with Nolan, was that he wanted to distance this Batman from the idea that there were anything like superheroes in that world. And he felt like having Batman essentially copy a superhero, whether they be fictional or not, was detrimental to the story they were trying to tell, which I think is super interesting.
I also think it's just an idea of updating it, because Zorro is such a 1930s thing. When he actually goes to the opera, you see all those bats and everything. I think that plays a lot into just establishing a character with all this trauma built into him. Because he has a panic attack just watching people dressed as bats. And Nolan taking that out does make it more a personal decision for him to dress this way, to scare people this way.
Just to make sure the focus is on Batman. Which also is the other thing here, is that there had never been a Batman movie that was really about Batman outside of Mask of the Phantasm. We now have Goyer and Nolan, by Goyer's account, being given pretty free reign over the content of the film. I know somewhere in there, the only thing they requested was that it not be rated R. My understanding is both Nolan and Goyer agreed because they wanted to make the character more accessible.
From what I heard, he wanted to make a cool comic book movie for 13-year-olds, which I think he exceeded very well at. So he didn't want to alienate anybody in his audience.
But, let's really start talking about the movie we got.
Okay, alright.
So we start off with a very brief first scene establishing a childhood Bruce Wayne with Rachel. And then, falling down the shaft that we are so familiar with from the many origins, and then waking up in a prison.
Yeah, Chinese prison, and they're all trying to beat him up, and he beats everybody else up. And it's a pretty cool scene, and it establishes the tone pretty quickly that this is very much an action movie, and not corny set pieces where people jumping motorcycles off of neon statues and things like that. This is very much a gritty, punchy film. It also
establishes something that, at that time is very important, that Batman is not in operation yet.
Yeah.
That we're not at that point. From there, the film takes Bruce to the hideout of the League of Shadows.
And he slowly recounts his past with the League of Shadows about his background, why he does what he does, and eventually the ultimate decision not to join the League of Shadows.
Yeah, because they're killy, and he doesn't like killies.
Yeah, I like how deep they go into his decision on why he doesn't like to kill. I have some problems with like the steps they take, but I think that's just because of how they write Rachel and the actress that plays Rachel in that film.
I think it is interesting, and I kind of like the setup that he wouldn't kill a thief because he understands that not everyone is driven to crime because they want to be criminals. And he really targets, as the movies go on, the criminals who want to be criminals. You know, the mobsters, the supervillains. This isn't a Batman who is typically going after, like, pickpockets. He's trying to kill crime. That's funny. He's trying to get rid of crime by cutting off the head.
He's going after the money men, the decision makers. He's not going after, like, the petty pickpocketers. There's a scene early on where he's, like, living on the streets because he basically just runs away from home. And he's, like, gives an orange to a kid. He even helps, like, steal some boxes from his company. This is where I have some, like, misgivings, is because it goes so quickly through all of this that it's, like, you're able to put that in your mind, but Christopher Nolan, like, runs through everything so quickly that you're not able to really digest everything at the same time.
I don't see it as a problem in this one. I think you're just getting the idea of he had to do a lot of things, and also that his path wasn't really certain at this point, and that he learns a lot from Ra's al Ghul and the real Ra's al Ghul about how to turn himself into something that is beyond just the crime he's fighting, which becomes this very consistent theme as the movies continue.
With the idea of Bruce wanting to kill Joe Chill, which in this version of Batman is the one that killed his parents.
I think for most of it, I still think he is, right? Yeah.
He doesn't always want to kill Joe Chill.
Oh, no, I mean Joe Chill being the killer.
Sometimes as the Joker, sometimes... There's a whole...
And then I think there was a whole thing where, like, Joe Chill didn't do it.
One time he is the Joker.
It is Joe Chill. It's just Joe Chill. Yeah.
But I do think that's a smart decision to, like, have Bruce Wayne come back and be so angry that he tries to kill Joe Chill, even though he's trying to testify against the mob. And he's trying to, like, actively do good again after the horrible thing he did. And only for Joe Chill to die does Bruce Wayne see that what he was doing was wrong, and it took somebody else to kill him.
Right, and that the problem is bigger than Joe Chill.
Right, it's bigger than his revenge. There's another scene with Rachel that is kind of awkward, but I like too.
Are you talking about the slapping scene?
The slapping scene.
Yeah,
she slaps him. Like, there's a weird, when we get to the Dark Knight Rises, there's memes based off the dialogue in the Batman films. And this is kind of my first time I noticed the weird kind of dialogue Nolan has. I think it's tempered a bit by Goyer getting involved with the script. But that scene with Rachel, it just seems odd, and I don't know if it's because of the actress or the script she was giving.
Yeah, it's probably a little bit of both. Not an insult, really, to Katie Holmes, who, you know, I really enjoyed on Dawson's Creek.
I forgot that's where she was from. I was like, I recognize her.
She's in other stuff, too. But, yeah, there is, I think now, a little awkwardness. I feel like at the time it played better. Just because of what we were coming from. Like, you know, this was like a huge leap, even from, like, Spider-Man 2 and X2, which were really solid.
Well, Spider-Man 2 has perfect dialogue. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us.
Oh, yeah.
All the New Yorker dialogue, I love that. But like X-Men, in X-Men 1, like, you have Toad getting struck by lightning and Storm says something really cheesy. There was a lot of really cheesy dialogue.
Yeah, this isn't, you know, the writing here, it isn't perfect, but it's a hell of a lot better than what was going on. And I feel like Nolan, since this, has proven that dialogue isn't as much of a challenge to him. And let's be honest, he wasn't as experienced of a filmmaker making that movie as he was later on.
I wouldn't say it was a challenge. I'd say he was pretty mercenary about it. Where he was just trying to get, like, the information across as quickly as possible. Because he has so many other things he wants to play with at the same time.
That's fair, I think. So as this movie continues, we do eventually have Bruce come back to Gotham. First in that not at all dissimilar prototype Batman from both year one. There's a little bit of Mask of the Phantasm in there.
Yeah, where he's dressing up in, like, a ski mask and everything.
Yeah. So it all makes sense. And then he eventually realizes what he has to be theatrical, to pull this off. And we get Batman chaining a mobster to a spotlight.
And that's how you get the bat signal. He cut the cloth perfectly in just a way to make it bad.
It's not perfect. It doesn't look like that. But it is funny where, like, you would think that maybe is where a lot of, like, the style has changed since then, where I don't think you would even bother doing something like that now. People are so familiar with superheroes. That, to me, was really just more this affirmation that this was Batman, that they weren't going to go completely off the rails. And then, as that movie, basically from that point on, it's the most Batman thing that had ever been made at that point.
Even that scene before he puts up the guy on the spot, like, that's a really cool Batman scene where he's chasing people from the shipyard. He's popping up behind them, pulling them into the shadows and everything.
And it's something that Batman had 100% existed in the comics and hadn't ever been translated to live action at that point.
I think that was a Goyer edition. I know Nolan, like, storyboarded all of this, but I think Goyer was the one that really helped him, like, bring out this version of Batman that sneaks in the shadow. Because even before this, you have, like, Victor Zsasz.
Oh, Zsasz, yeah.
Victor Zsasz as one of the mob killers that gets pushed away in Arkham Asylum. There's a lot of small references here and there throughout this movie, and that's really like a Goyer edition.
Yeah, and what I always appreciated about this and the other Nolan films is they don't ever, like, waste anything like that. Like, I never felt like they put characters in just so they could say they were there. Like, Zsasz has a role. It gets to Scarecrow, even though he's not quite as extreme as we're used to. We're going to talk about that a little bit more, too. But those scenes, when I saw the trailer originally of Jonathan Crane, like, sneaking about because Batman's around, was, like, the reason I wanted to see the movie, because it felt like Batman for the first time.
I just saw it because it was Batman. I was, like, 10, so I was just going to the theaters every Friday with my dad. And I came out remembering, like, a lot of the scenes in the ending, but not so much in the beginning. And I think that's because, like, Nolan just likes to cut from scene to scene to scene. There's a lot of, like, of his Memento style, especially in the early beginning where he's jumping from, like, present, past. This is where the movie stables out as, like, all present. All in the present time, I should say, not just present like gifts.
And that, I think, is sort of the signal that things are moving forward, too. You know, obviously his relationship with Gordon is developing. You're getting to see more of his relationship with Alfred. Lucius Fox becomes a big part of all of it. Almost a secondary Alfred, like a tech Alfred.
I do like how they split the Alfreds. Lucius Fox is in the comics, but he's very rarely talked about.
Now they've changed that with Alfred dead in the comics. He's taken over. Right, but that's because
of the Nolan stuff, though. Because Nolan made him such an important character. Here, I really like what they did with Lucius Fox, just because he's, like, a tech guy and he has all this weird stuff, like, basically in his dumpster.
Well, he's the king of the dumpster. That's like, they've stuck him down there in the tech dumpster because he's, you know, too mouthy when it comes to the meetings.
Yeah, and I do like how they actually try to define Wayne Industry as having some kind of, like, role. Like, they make things. Because usually it's just like, it's Wayne Industries. It's whatever. This is what gives Batman money. But here they actually are like, oh, they actually make weapons and things like that. And also a great performance by the late Rutger Hauer, which doesn't, I think, get enough attention at this point. At the time, a lot of people talked about it, but now... It's overshadowed. It's overshadowed, quite frankly. So, you know, we get through this movie that I think does a really good job of establishing a very basic Batman. You get a lot of borrowing from year one, including the ending where you get the Joker tease, which we'll talk about as almost an entirely separate topic. But you've gone from essentially a world that never had a Batman that felt like a comic book Batman to having a movie end on 100% like comic booky Batman. They explain the ethics, they explain the tech, and now you're sort of off to the races. Yeah, I'd say there's one point where they kind of veer off of Batman, which is when Batman lets Ra's al Ghul die on the train. Because that feels like a very Nolan version of Batman. Because most of the time, Batman would just save him because he doesn't kill anybody. He lets the justice system deal with it. And him letting Ra's al Ghul die, I think, solves problems later on in the trilogy if you watch the trilogy all the way through. But I do, I guess, agree with it in a thematic sense because he can't just kidnap Ra's al Ghul and put in the justice system. Because they're just going to, like... They're all corrupt. They're all in his pocket anyway. Yeah, and even further than that, you know, one of the things that, going back to the whole idea of this being like the first superhero, is like there's no structure for a supervillain. Like there's no place to stick a supervillain. Batman, in this case, knows that if Ra's al Ghul lives, that's it. Like it's just going to happen again. Like it's an interesting choice
I think it kind of mirrors Man of Steel in that respect, which Goyer also wrote. Though that ending, some people say, was more Snyder than Goyer. I think there is that idea of, if you're going to ground this, that's where maybe you lose a little bit of that. Where, like, this would be the guy who's trying not to kill anyone as much as he possibly can. Yeah. And that's the more maybe realistic view. And if you're grounding it, yeah, maybe that's the way you have to deal with it. And that's something I'm going to go back to, too, as we get through the trilogy, because I think that starts to change for a thematic reason.
I think there's a lot of, like, general culture seeping into the film, especially later on with how, like, Nolan approaches Batman. It feels like he's not making his own Batman, but, like, an amalgamation of several different Batmans.
I would agree with that.
But Goyer kept, like, a very focused Batman, especially in the first one, which I really liked. But to recount the plot a bit, like, after he comes back to Gotham, he slowly discovers, like, he has to go after the mobsters, and he enlists Gordon to help him go after the mobsters. He meets back with Rachel, and Rachel says some significant lines to him that he'll say at the end of the film. And basically all leads to him going to Arkham Asylum, where Scarecrow has been drugging the patients, either so they can't go to court and testify, or to put them in the pocket of the League of Shadows, or League of Assassins.
League of Shadows in the movie, yeah.
League of Shadows, okay.
Probably the most over-the-top thing in the movie.
I really like it, though.
I like it, too, because it is like a more practical sort of idea of where Scarecrow would come from.
I wouldn't say, well, yeah, I thought you were going to say that ending scene's practical, where it's like, all the mains are bursting and everything.
If it gets to the hub, it's gonna blow!
No, yeah, but I really like that version of Scarecrow, because it speaks to, like, Nolan's ability to be like, where would this character come from? Like, how is he able to do all this? And I think that's why he stays away from, like, Poison Ivy, Killer Croc, Solomon Grundy, and all these other kind of, like, magnificent villains, and goes for the more, like, tech-based villains.
Oh, right, and he's also not there yet. The idea of Batman, that Batman couldn't handle that, probably.
No.
Not at that point. But this is, like, just the level he can handle, and he does save the city. But at the end of that, Arkham's a mess. Most of the people are out, which kind of sets up this idea of what happened to Gotham and why maybe there were things going on we never heard about in between movies that involved characters, things like that. It sets up this sort of...
They kind of revisit and they kind of don't.
But we now have this idea of a city in chaos. Perpetual chaos.
Yeah, I do like how they showed the city of Gotham in Batman Begins, because it's very grimy and dirty, and you see it early on where they're on the train. And it's like, oh, it's a nice shiny utopia. And Wayne Tower is surprisingly small for being the heart of the city. At the end of the film, it's all grimy and dirty. Everything's like covered in rust and like smoke and everything.
Yeah, they really didn't have to do too much to Chicago for that.
No.
I'm kind of half joking. But Chicago does, like, the reason they picked Chicago to shoot in is a lot of sections have that sort of beat up vibe where, like, Chicago didn't have that Times Square renewal that New York did in the 90s. So, like, there's still a lot of stuff in Chicago that's pretty old and pretty beat up.
But there's a lot of, like, architecture there, too, that's, like, very old and very, like, iconic. That still looks New York, but it has more of those, like, gargoyles and stuff on it than New York does, where New York is very willing to just tear down a building and build a new one.
And of course the Pedway, which will be a big part in the Dark Knight.
It's like in every Dark Knight movie.
So, we've established Gotham, we establish the type of villains we could run into. The last shot of the movie is essentially the end of year one. Gordon passing off the Joker card to Batman, and him saying, I'll look into it, which to this day, I think is the best ending of any superhero movie ever.
I mean, when I was 10, I didn't really think about it. But I do like watching again. It's like such a cool ending because he's like, oh, you're going after the mob now. Even the city's just in chaos. The mob's trying to take control. You're getting to the money. You're escalating things.
Yeah, and then this lunatic shows up.
Yeah, and there's a new lunatic in town. They're like, ooh, who could this be? It's a Joker card. You're like, oh, man.
It is, and it's the perfect type of way to play your audience, too. Because it's not... It's cool to start, and it makes complete sense where it is. It's not out of place. It's not some, like, stupid Easter egg. It's where the story should be going next, and because everyone who's watching the movie, or I should say 95% of people watching the movie, know what that means, it just made the whole story so much more significant. there was all this chatter that part of the reason they did that was because they weren't really sure if they were going to get past Batman Begins. And they wanted to sort of just establish, like, okay, now this world exists. We finally told Batman's story. If nothing else, we have a movie where Batman is the focus. Well, but of course, it did extremely well.
Yeah, it helped thematically, too. Just this idea of, like, Batman changing things fundamentally in the city. And it's also, I think, them trying to hook the studios into it, because they started with these two kind of obscure villains, and Ra's al Ghul and Scarecrow. Though they do a great job of, like, tying them into Batman's past, especially with Ra's al Ghul, kind of making him the anti-Batman.
Right, and Scarecrow had been something that Warner's wanted in the movie. Scarecrow was supposed to be in Batman Triumphant. There was also this other script that it's kind of hard to find a lot of information about that was going to be called, this is the most 90s title it could be. It was going to be called Dark Knight, but it was Darknight, one word. Geez. And I think he's involved in that too. I might actually look a little bit more into that and see if I can dig and find out more of that for everyone. But Scarecrow was something that was on the table, and I feel like that was almost Goyer and Nolan going like, okay, they want us to use this character, that's fine, this character fits, and it sounds like Ra's al Ghul is really them. But we end on this point, you have people very excited about Batman now. Everyone's waiting for the announcement. I think the announcement came pretty quick that there would be a sequel. And Goyer and Nolan had planned 4 sequels. They had structured 3 movies. There is something I'm going to bring up a little later that is interesting to me about that whole 3-movie structure. But Goyer is, while he's not directly writing on The Dark Knight, he is an influence on it and did plot it and all these things. It ends up being Christopher and his brother Jonah actually writing the script for The Dark Knight. I think is something that doesn't get talked about enough anymore is what happened in between Batman Begins and The Dark Knight. Obviously, you now have a very excited community of fans. You're trying to control flow of information. So a little more than a year before the movie came out, in May of 2007, these websites start popping up, asking people to do different things, and the first one results in the reveal of the first picture of the Joker.
The famous one on all the posters.
Not even the famous one on all the posters. The one where it's a super close-up of his face.
Oh, really?
That's the first thing that came out, and this starts about 14 months of, like, insane online promotion involving games, involving San Diego Comic-Con, involving me having to wake up at 5 in the morning to work on the computer so my friends at Comic-Con could do the path correctly and I could research for them and they could get the stuff, and then winning newspapers and having fake mobsters call you, threatening you. Like, it to this day, I don't think anyone has done anything that expansive, and I've seen a couple of things where, like, marketing teams have tried to do things like this. But we're talking hundreds of people running through the streets of New York looking for bat signals. We're talking people going through the streets of San Diego wearing Joker makeup, getting sent Harvey Dent buttons in the mail, like, and you didn't even know what the movie was yet.
The only other one I could think of was Year Zero by Nine Inch Nails did something very similar, but it wasn't as, like, well-funded as this. Because this one had all those, you're right, like those Harvey Dent buttons, posters, people actually in the makeup and everything. But, like, people had no idea what was coming out because it was so under wraps at this point. Yeah,
and anything that did come out was just insane. I remember, I couldn't tell you exactly when. I had played these games. And a friend of mine and I had won one of them and gotten passes to see the opening scene of the movie in IMAX in the city, like, months before it came out. And, like, I've never seen anything like the excitement that was being generated for this. Unfortunately, it's then also paired with the death of Heath Ledger before the film comes out.
Weirdly enough, that probably did more publicity than these viral games did. I think the viral games were very focused on getting fans' interest, while the death of Heath Ledger, which is tragic, got the general public interested more than probably would have.
And I would agree with that. And, you know, like you said, like, it's not something that is pleasant to talk about, but denying the impact it had would be silly, especially because everything that anyone had seen of him as the Joker at that point was so intriguing.
It was really out there. Even today, it's like what he did with the Joker is still kind of revolutionary.
I would totally agree with that. But so by the time this movie comes out, everyone is interested that's going to be interested. They haven't lost anyone. And then it ends up really good.
It ends up probably one of the best comic book movies, probably up there still in the IMDb top 100 highest rated movies. And it's still like a great, great movie. It's so frenetic, so fast paced, but like you still get all the information you need. It plays with a lot of ideas, maybe for not as long as I would have wanted it, but like it goes through so many themes and ideas about security, escalation, chaos, anarchy, all those things.
And that's one of the things I do appreciate with Nolan that I think carries through the trilogy is he'll establish themes and he'll make sure that you know what he's talking about, because the last thing you hear about is escalation when it comes to Begins. And now we're in this escalated Gotham. Like, we're now in this scenario. I think something that gets overlooked here, because we're so used to characters floating around now, is, you have your opening sequence, which I think is probably...
It's a brilliant opening sequence.
First of all, it's brilliant. You're right. And it still remains one of the greatest, like, action sequences in any film ever.
Yeah, they do try to top it in The Dark Knight Rises, but the way they dole out information in that, you have all these guys in clown masks just like trying to break into a bank. You're not really sure why they're doing it besides that they just want money. But you find out at the end it was for a much bigger purpose. And they're all doling out information like, oh, I heard about this Joker guy. He's like in clown makeup or something. Oh, he probably does it for war paint. And then they're all killing each other as the heist goes on. They're like, oh, you fixed the alarm? Yeah, we're good. Dead. Oh, you broke into the safe? Dead. And at the end, with Joker's like, no, I killed the bus driver.
Yeah.
And then it was like, what do you mean the bus driver? Then he just gets killed. It's such a great sequence. Even like with the bank teller pulling out a shotgun, trying to kill the people running into this bank. I think it says so much about the city and the people that live with it and how like crime functions in Gotham without like sitting people down and explaining it to them.
It's the classic rule that every professor tells you if you're doing lit or screenwriting or any type of storytelling of show, don't tell.
He's excellent about this in this movie.
It also leaves you completely intrigued with who the Joker is. Because now you know you're not getting Jack Nicholson. Like, you know you're getting something very different. You already know what Gotham is like because of the last film. This is a movie that can hit the ground running and does what almost no other movies do, which is it never stops.
And is very focused the whole time, too. Like, there's not a whole lot of information you need to glean, but is very good about giving you that information. We'll explain the plot in just a second. I don't want to talk too much about the Joker, because we have a whole podcast on that, too.
Yeah, there is something I do want to address, because this is something, while I was doing the research for this podcast, I stumbled across a really great quote. As I mentioned before, Nolan doesn't talk a lot about specifics of things, unless he's kind of like, I don't want to say cornered, but like someone asks him a good question, he's going to answer it, which on press junkets doesn't happen often.
No.
There is a channel on YouTube called Behind the Curtain. They did a compilation of like every relevant interview about the writing of this movie that they could find. They do it really well. They pull some quotes from articles. They find quotes from video interviews from all over the place in Nolan. It's really great. We'll put a link in the description just so you guys can check that out on your own. Within one of those videos, I heard a quote from Nolan that I'd never heard from, and he was saying this, that the Joker in this film, first of all, comes out fully formed. And that was intentional because in the comics, that's how the Joker showed up. The other thing he says, I think, is like the most telling thing about this movie and its writing that I've ever heard. Nolan says that what scares him is a threat without a reason. Something that can only be solved by someone fighting it. That's the only solution, and that's what the Joker is in the film. It's not someone you can reason with. It's not someone who is wronged. It's just this force that the only thing that can be done is to literally fight it. And if there is a counterpoint to the other theme of this, which is like the collapse of Harvey Dent, it's that. It's this idea that there are things that you just have to destroy.
Which is weird, because he kills Ra's al Ghul, but not the Joker.
But he doesn't kill Ra's al Ghul.
He's like, oh, I don't have to save you. He lets him die. And the whole thing about... I'm going to get into it. So, Joker's whole thing about is making Batman break his code. And he does it through various means. Because at this point, we all know Batman has a code of no killing. They don't reference it directly in these films. They always say, well, you have rules. And it's implied that these rules are not killing people. Even though he's, like, in a club throwing people off of, like, 2 foot, like...
Yeah, and cars are getting smashed into the
roof.
We won't get into it. No one died. They're all okay.
Even the first one, they're like, miraculously, nobody died.
Yeah, it's like...
Tumbler crashing through buildings and everything.
There's, like, rockets getting shot. Everyone's alive. It's okay.
Only the Joker kills people, but, like, Joker's big thing is that he wants Batman to kill people by proxy, and he starts that by... Originally... He goes to the mob, says, I can kill the Batman. Really, that's a lie. He just wants to get paid while doing it.
Right.
And he kind of wants to take over. Really, what he wants to do is to make Batman break his code of no killing people. And the first way he does that is through admission. So at first, it's like, if Batman doesn't reveal himself, I'm going to kill a person every day. And these are all people involved with extraditing the mob, trying to get them into prison, trying to get them into court to testify. So he kills several people.
Which is also kind of this weird parallel with Batman Forever, where Batman is trying to tell everyone he's Batman to save lives, and it doesn't work anyway.
But at this point, we already saw Batman kill people by admission, and I think that it's just because of the way I watched them back to back. So, like, thematically, that's a weird, like, fraying thing. But if you watch the movie on its own, you're able to understand, like, oh, this is Batman has a code, he doesn't kill people.
I think, though, I agree, like, that rapid succession thing, and I think it's true with any series, you're going to pick up on stuff like that. I think it is there, and I think the other thing that works in Nolan's favor is time has passed, and Batman, even at the point we pick up in that first sequence in Dark Knight, he's already more Batman than he was in the last movie.
Yeah, he's like improving the suit. He's like, oh, I can't turn my head. I can't do this. Can you do this to the suit? Which I think is really cool. This is,
But I think even more on, like, an ethical level, like, he's starting to get his role. Like, his... You know, the Batman Begins is about him figuring out what he needs to do. Dark Knight is he's doing what he needs to do and he's getting better at it. But now escalation is occurring. He's running into multiple supervillains in the movie, and he has to dispatch them. He's going to become a better Batman by the end of it, and he already has in this, like, theoretical, like, 18 months that's taken place in between.
There is a point, too, to that this is about a better Batman, which is a very Goyer idea. I don't know how closely both Nolans play to that, which is, I guess, where I have a very minor misstep. I mean, like I said, the movie on its own is just, like, brilliant. I think trying to make a trilogy where there's very clear thematic themes across all of them, that's where you see a lot of the missteps. Is where they're, like, they kind of approach them, but they never really, like, explore them, like, which is a lot of what the DC, like, 2010 movies were about.
When we get to Rises, we'll talk a little bit more about this. We have very different opinions on Rises. But, as you said, I don't think any of those slight missteps really affect anything in the film.
No.
Because it is moving so hard and so fast. It's... By the time you realize that the Joker's arc is over, and you already have Two-Face, it's like, boom. It's all, like, within minutes.
Yeah, which is both the great thing and the bad thing about Nolan. I don't even want to say the bad thing. That's just how Nolan operates. He wants to, like, go through all these things so quickly because he's jamming in so much information. Like, Batman's running all over the place in these films.
And this brings me to, like, another point, and I think it's interesting because it does kind of, in a way, address what you were talking about with maybe Batman, you're getting asked a little too much to, like, believe.
No, I don't think I'm being asked too much to believe, because one thing I really like about these Batman movies is that they spend a lot of time in the tech and the training, which is something you don't see in superhero movies anymore, weirdly enough. Like, Doctor Strange has a whole training montage, but at the same time it feels incredibly unrealistic. Iron Man spends so little time in the lab in all 3 movies, weirdly enough. But here's, like, you know, he's testing out all these weapons and things like that. I don't have a problem with, like, Batman fighting these guys.
We also get a much bigger taste of, like, Detective Batman in this.
Yeah, which is what I really like.
Though he's just kind of, like, he's more like, here's some science about this. And
well, yeah, he has that scene where he's shooting all the cinder blocks with a cool-ass gun.
Yeah.
And they're doing forensics, like, oh, this is the bullet they use, and they somehow get a fingerprint from that.
Yeah, but like we were saying, it's about movement. Like, it's about addressing all these things. I made the argument many times that, where Batman Begins is a very traditional, like, film in a lot of ways. Dark Knight is a 5-act structure. It's like a Shakespearean structure where you have your problem, you have resolution, you have your problem, you have resolution, as opposed to, like, just building to one resolution. But there's something that I wanted to mention because, it comes directly from Goyer addressing the plot of this. And I think it's important because it establishes something that becomes very important in Rises. Goyer and Nolan made a conscious decision to make Harvey Dent the hero of the story in a traditional sense.
It's fascinating because Harvey Dent's always portrayed as like an ambulance chaser, as a kind of a dirty lawyer or a dirty cop, and here's very much portrayed as a very clean cop who got his hand dirty a couple of times here and there. He might have anger issues, which I would have liked to see a bit more about. Because they call him Two-Face, but you don't really know why they call him Two-Face or what he did in forensics that got him kicked out.
Yeah, and I would say it's always leading more to the fact that he's busting these corrupt cops, and, they don't want to work with him because they feel like he's coming after them. And it's the good cops that realize that he's really is genuinely trying to just clean up everything.
Yeah, but when you hear that line that he's called Two-Face is from Gordon, who's like the cleanest cop in the city.
But Gordon would be aware of it. He's the commissioner.
Well, he gets promoted to commissioner in that movie.
Yeah, that's true. But he would be aware of things like that. I buy that. Like, I don't see it as, like, a mischaracterization. Like, we've all heard people shit-talking people at work, whether or not we agree with it. And I feel like that's sort of Gordon's attitude. And I feel like that's why Gordon doesn't want to say it, is because Gordon doesn't believe it. And this guy is in trauma, and he's not thinking supervillain. He's thinking this guy just got half his face blown off. His fiance is dead. I don't want to upset him.
Yeah, which is where I think why he didn't want to say that name is because
right.
His wife is dead, and his body is now half a chicken nugget now.
Like I just said, like, if we're characterizing Harvey as the hero, it's then a proof that the Joker's not wrong. It's a proof that the Joker can corrupt heroes. And it leaves Batman in a new position that is distinct from Begins. Where in Begins, he's the focus, and you're focusing on his development as a character. In Dark Knight, Batman's becoming a force of nature.
He's becoming like a myth at this point, because there's a lot of, like, in the beginning, people are like, criminals are out, they turn on the bat signal, and you see the criminals like, oh, somebody's doing a stick-up. He's like, oh, not tonight, I'm not hanging out here tonight. At this point, he is, like, the myth of the Dark Knight.
Right, and we know that the chances, like, not only do the criminals know, because that's mentioned directly in the dialogue,
yeah,
but we know that the chances of Batman even seeing that are, like, astronomical. Like, he would never even be involved. But the idea of Batman is becoming powerful, and that's the whole idea that this ends on. Because I feel like we're still really close to Batman, because Batman's very close to Dent and everything going on with that. But it does kind of lead into this ending where the Joker's actually kind of dispatched in, like, unremarkable ways.
Which I really like. Again, that's, like, an influence that, like, seeps into a lot of other films, seeps into, like, Quantum Solace. Like, the Joker's not a good fighter. He kind of, like, wields firearms in really weird, shoddy ways. When he's fighting Batman, he's just kind of, like, awkwardly stomping on him.
Though people don't mention... And I don't know if I mentioned this in the Joker podcast, and I apologize for repeating myself, but it's something that pops into my head every time. People forget that in that scene where the Joker is walking down the street, he's killing people in their cars as Batman's coming towards him. The Joker, like Batman, is this force of nature character, but it's this idea of this corrupting influence, and the corruption of Harvey Dent is your, like, Empire Strikes Back ending. It's things have gone to shit. Like, things are out of control, even though you have this force of good around.
I think this is where, like, the theming gets really weird, too, because you have this... Harvey Dent does become Two-Face. He becomes this guy that's going around killing mobsters. Which they're like, oh, if Harvey Dent ever got his hands dirty, that'd be the end of it. Which I'm like, sure, but what's really the difference here between that and Batman, besides Batman doesn't kill people? Ignoring all that, I'm willing to say, like, if Harvey Dent does kill people, that ruins the entire operation. Fine.
Right.
Where it gets weird is where it somehow involves the soul of Gotham, because At a certain point, Joker says the guy that's going to reveal Bruce Wayne's identity, who is just like some stooge working at Wayne Enterprises that finds all the schematics for the Batsuit and the tumbler and everything. He goes to a late night show, doesn't kill the host, unlike in the new Joker movie. And,
Spoiler.
and he says, I'm going to reveal who Batman is. And Joker calls in saying, well, I don't want you doing that. This spoils the fun. If somebody kills you, then I'll stop killing. And the whole point of it is that, like, I'm going to turn Gotham against itself.
Right.
And people are shooting at this guy, like, almost immediately. But then at the end of the film, when he gives the two, like, bombs to the two ships, because one ship has all the criminals from the mob investigation, the other ship just has a bunch of civilians on it. And somehow neither ship blows each other up. Even though just, like, a day before they were all claiming to kill this guy.
But I think that's part of the journey. I think that's, like, the city is, in a way... I mean, Gotham is always a reflection of Batman. Like, in every version. Like, Gotham is always a counterpart to Batman. It's a character that exists around him. And I think that's one of the things that has been done really well over the years, actually. Even in the ones that aren't that good, is the Batman being presented is always in a Gotham that matches him. I think they're on the same journey as Batman, in a way. But this is where, like, I'm going to drop this idea that I've written a little bit about in the past, if you read some of my stuff, that was on, like, Den of Geek. I think one of the big points coming out of Dark Knight is that once this idea of Batman is fully formed, which it pretty much is by the end of the Dark Knight, you get almost that messianic thing around Batman. Like, this idea that Batman is the way. Like, Batman is the path you should be following. And to me, that whole sequence of the citizens not blowing each other up is them realizing, like, no, there's a light at the end of the tunnel here because we know, like, Batman is out there.
Yeah, but none of them say that or even, like, reference that even vaguely.
But I don't think they have to say it directly.
But they were just killing people, like, a scene before.
Right, but that's a scene before. That's what I'm saying, is it's moving, and you're realizing that, and that's then the counterpoint to that, where it flips again, is Batman not killing the Joker. Is Batman deciding, okay, the Joker has to go to trial because that's what Harvey in his right mind would want. You want to be able to show people that there is justice and there isn't just vigilantism out on the streets.
But then Batman kills Harvey Dent. Well, accidentally, I guess.
He doesn't kill Harvey Dent. He saves someone and he dies. I think that's pretty...
He saves Gordon's kid.
Right. He saves the person who's innocent, as Dent has now lost it and become the villain that he was afraid he was going to become. And the public can't know that because that'll derail all of the good that just happened because of the last 4 things that happened.
I guess. I just feel like there's a lot of, like, quick assumptions you have to make, especially, like, from an audience point of view, where you're like, oh, these guys didn't do this because of Batman.
That's what I like about Nolan's filmmaking, though, is Nolan gives enough for the people who are just there to be entertained and aren't going to think any further. And then, if you want to dig, it is there.
That's true. There is another part, too, where he attempts to discuss, like, security and, like, the NSA and everything, and it's just, like, a kind of a really quick thing that I don't think really gets explored either, because early in the film they show that, like, cell phones... Fox has a way to get cell phones to emit, like, a frequency that allows them to map a room. And Fox is very willing to do that at the beginning of the film, and then at the end of the film, Batman figures out a way to do it to every cell phone in the city, and they use that to catch the Joker. And that's the line for Fox for some reason, even though he gave, like, Batman a tank and guns. Well, he didn't give guns, but, like...
Well, I think the idea is that a little bit of, like, ethics about criminal justice and things like that, too, is if Batman's targeted, that's not an issue. Lucius Fox is worrying about creating a monster. He's worrying about having this guy who's watching everything at all times, which isn't what Batman's supposed to be doing, which also goes back to that point from Begins where, like, Batman's not going after the pickpocket who has to feed their family. He's going after the head of the beast. I think that plays really well into it. I think that's Lucius Fox not wanting to have this technology in perpetuity because it would create the temptation to become that evil Batman that is in every 4th alternate reality. You know? Like that idea of, like, this Batman who is controlling Gotham instead of trying to support it.
Like Owlman, OMAC, Batman
Right.
who laughs.
Right, you don't want a Batman who's watching everything, because if you allow yourself to judge everyone, you're going to.
That's true, but I always feel like it's not, like, explored in the film itself, because they use the thing once, and then Lucius Fox immediately deletes it, and he doesn't even know what it's going to do. Batman just says, type your name in, and then hit enter, and then Lucius Fox does it, and he deletes it.
But that's the show of good faith, and it's also another thing bolstering the idea that Bruce has truly become this, like, pillar of virtue. That he doesn't want this technology, you're right, we needed it for this, but that's done. I did what I was supposed to do, that's all I was doing, and now I'm moving on.
Yeah, and then he literally moves on to, he kind of retires when we get to the next film, but...
that's important to talk about, too, because that ending where, the big Gordon speech, Batman is taking the blame for everything that went wrong, even though he absolutely was not the reason.
Yeah, it was all Harvey Dent, because like you said, Joker did corrupt him, which is kind of the most interesting part of the film, where Joker was right in many, many ways, but not even the Joker knows that. And
he might know. I don't think the Joker's stupid. I think he's crazy.
Because he's surprised that the boats don't blow each other up, which is kind of the one misstep he makes this whole time.
I guess so, but in the respect that he thinks that people are evil like him, and they're not, which is the point.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like, this film is exceptional, but I feel like there's a lot of points where you have to fill in the blanks yourself with, like, your own meta, like, commentary.
But I don't think that's a problem, because I think anyone who is looking to do that does it, and anyone who's not doesn't.
You have a point there, whereas, like, because I remember watching this movie in the theaters twice, and a lot of people were just there for the action scenes, which are
phenomenal.
They're phenomenal. Like, where they're in the Chicago tunnels. Like, that's such a brilliant chase scene that's, like, still not topped to this day.
So we end with, Dark Knight in theaters. At the time, the highest grossing film of all time.
It's the 4th highest opening weekend, I think, now.
Yeah, I didn't go back into the stats because, you know what? It's not that important. We know the impact it had. I think the bigger impact here is the Dark Knight's success really led to two things. One, it led to all of this confidence in superhero movies that is now the world we live in. And two, it also led to confidence in being able to plan ahead on those movies, where you can plant seeds of storyline, you can plant seeds of thematics, and obviously not to the scale that Marvel does it now, but it opened the door.
But Marvel based a lot of what would become Marvel off of, like, Batman Begins. They saw what Batman Begins had with all these comic book references. So, like, we can do that. We can make serious films, too. We have all these characters. And then when The Dark Knight came out, that kind of changed the game again, but in a very, very different way.
I can say with, like, no hesitation that The Dark Knight is the most important superhero movie ever made. You could make an argument for Superman. You could probably make a pretty good argument for Spider-Man. I don't think any of them hold up to the influence that this had on culture. Like, at the time, everyone knew what you were talking about with that movie. They knew that portrayal of the Joker. They knew all the lines. It's where the floodgates opened. Yeah. It's where, 13-year-old girls would be wearing comic book t-shirts. Like, that's when you start to see it, is that year.
Batman Begin, like, planted the seeds for this, and, like, The Dark Knight had really blossomed. You're right, like, this is where, like, people started wearing comic book shirts where they had, like, Why So Serious, which was fucking everywhere at that point. And, like...
I still have my theatrical poster.
Oh, wow. And, like, you had people actually talking about, like, Batman in a serious way, because you had all these ideas about, like, the NSA and, like, mob and, like, vigilantes, justice, all that in this film.
Before we move on, there's a couple of things I want to touch upon that I think are interesting before we close out this trilogy. First is, especially on Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, a lot of the secrecy around it still remains. We know pretty directly that there were scenes shot for Begins that have never come out using an alternate Scarecrow that would have been like as if the audience was on the fear gas, like could see like a scary Scarecrow. Something that kind of paralleled that like demon Batman.
Well, you kind of got that at the end of Batman Begins where he's blowing fire out of the horse, but...
Well, there was even like a second mask, because like people have talked about it, and this is footage that's never been seen. This movie comes out in 2005 in like the height of DVD special features. That never came out. We know there is endless alternate takes to the Heath Ledger performance, alternate angles. None of that has ever come out. There is still this mystique on those movies because of that.
It is weird that Nolan hasn't really talked about it, but I'm glad he hasn't too, because I don't feel he could speak to the performance of Heath Ledger, because that's Heath Ledger's performance. And I think that's how Nolan approaches a lot of this. Like, he can talk about the cinematography, but ultimately you have to ask his DP about that.
And that kind of leads into the next thing I wanted to talk about. I pulled a quote from an interview that completely threw me off with Goyer, where he had talked about a different Dark Knight Rises. And now, mind you, Goyer was involved in the process all through these. So, like, it's not like he didn't work on the Bane movie we got.
Well, he, like, did the original outline or something, right?
But then he came back to work on the script, too.
He's not credited in the end, is he?
I think he is, for story.
For story, not for, like, the actual
But he did come back, like, and had an active role. He mentioned a version of the third film that would have opened where, at the end of The Dark Knight, Harvey Dent did not become Two-Face. That the end of The Dark Knight would have been the arrest of the Joker. And the third movie would have opened with the Joker throwing the acid on Harvey Dent's face in the courtroom, which is a lot closer to the comics.
I don't like that, because I feel like the idea of Harvey Dent listening to Rachel die and everything is far more important than the acid.
And I agree, but what I wanted to bring that up for is there was a lot of rumors as these movies were coming out that there were other characters that were, like, actors were being spoken to. I remember Philip Seymour Hoffman as the Penguin was, like, a constant rumor.
I heard the Riddler a lot.
There's DiCaprio, Riddler rumor. I can't help but wonder if there was a draft or a version of a movie where you would have gotten more supervillains centered around the trial of the Joker.
That's what I was thinking too while watching this, because while watching this, I don't dislike Bane, but I think something like the Riddler or the Penguin would have better served the themes they established in The Dark Knight, especially with, like, secrecy and all these lies they told about Harvey Dent, about Batman, and about, like, corrupting your own values to preserve, like, some kind of greater good.
And I disagree with that, and we'll talk about it why.
Okay.
I'll talk about why in a second. But I think that's an interesting thing, because there's also those pretty persistent, not even rumors, because a lot of people involved in production, Heath Ledger's family, have come out and said that he was supposed to be in the third one. I wonder if we would have gotten something. I remember the rumor at the time was that when you find out that Scarecrow is the judge in Dark Knight Rises, and we'll loop back around to the beginning of Dark Knight Rises in a bit, but since we're talking, like, alternate versions of reality here, that role was written for the Joker. There's also supposedly a scene written where, like, you would have seen the Joker in, like, a cell while, like, Bane was going around. That would have been fairly underwhelming. I think the judge thing might have been cool. It's interesting to know that somewhere in there plans changed. Because even Nolan didn't really commit to it until 2010. I mean, publicly commit to it, I should say.
That's when he, like, said he beat it out some kind of outline, which means a lot of different things to people. Depends who you ask what you mean an outline is.
Yeah, and especially because they had already said that they had worked on this while they were working on Begins. I have a feeling he had an idea going into it, just if things changed. And maybe, you know, I can't help but think that he might have not wanted to do it because of the death of Heath Ledger. You know, not that I've never attributed anything to that whole theory that, like, oh, being the Joker, like, drove him to drug use and all that stuff. I think that's silly. But I think it probably was an emotionally difficult thing to move from what was, you know, making a film that big is always going to be very exhausting, psychologically, physically. I have a feeling that maybe he just didn't want to commit at that point because it was just such a huge undertaking.
I think at this point he wanted to do something else, like Inception, Interstellar, all these other movies he's done since The Dark Knight Rises. Before we move into The Dark Knight Rises, I think it's probably prudent to quickly sum up a plot of The Dark Knight, because a lot of it leaks into The Rises.
All right, so go ahead.
Alright, so at first, I mean, this is very rapid. Basically, Batman's going after the money men of the mob. One of them flees to China, he brings them back from China, and they're going to extradite him, they're going to do all this stuff, they're going to make him testify to everybody in the mob. And one of the big scenes is that Harvey Dent gets 300 people into a courtroom because of this, and he's going to try them all at once. That's when the mob turns to the Joker, saying they'll pay him to kill the Batman, and that's when the Joker starts terrorizing the city. He does allow himself to get captured at one point, which leaks into like Skyfall, all like multiple other movies start referencing like the villain let himself get captured to break out. And the Joker's plan is that he captures both Rachel and Harvey Dent, and he's going to make Batman choose. And Batman chooses Rachel, and he sends Gordon to go get Harvey Dent. Really, Joker switches the two. Harvey Dent is actually where Rachel is, and Rachel's actually where Harvey Dent is. So Batman accidentally saves Harvey Dent, and because of that, Harvey Dent resents Batman and everybody else in the town for letting Rachel die.
Don't forget that Harvey Dent is also horribly disfigured.
Yeah, from the
because
explosion.
he just barely gets him out of the explosion.
Yeah, he's also covered in gasoline because he tries to escape and he dousers himself in gasoline. During this time, he's in the hospital and Joker says he's going to blow up several hospitals unless Batman reveals his identity, or if somebody kills the guy that is going to reveal Batman's identity. So Joker's just causing chaos everywhere. He doesn't really care what's going on. This is where you have the infamous scene where he's like, do I look like a guy with a plan? It's like, you planned out all these hospitals to get bombed.
Well, he's just trying to... he's pushing his own image.
Yeah, he's pushing his own image. He has a big monologue, or he has a big scene with Harvey Dent where he basically feeds Harvey Dent all these lies. It's like, I'm just a guy. You should blame the people up top. Like, I'm just doing my job. Then he breaks Harvey Dent out of the hospital, and Harvey Dent goes on a killing spree. During this time, Batman tries to stop Joker. He eventually does in a big action scene where he's using all this sonar infrared technology to spy on people.
And we finally get our pupilless Batman.
Yes, with the cool
glowy eyes. He catches Joker, and he finds out, the Joker, that the citizens of Gotham are not willing to kill each other. So Joker's ideology is broken at that point. But Batman then finds out that Gordon has been taken hostage by Harvey Dent, and Harvey Dent's going to kill his wife and children, just like how he had to hear his loved one, Rachel, die. And he's going to flip a coin because he's Two-Face.
Yeah, and he flips a coin and like all of them land on heads, so like all of them were destined to live, weirdly enough. Because tails they die, heads they live. So Batman saves Gordon's kid, and Harvey Dent dies in the process because of the fall out of like a 10-story building. And because of that, Batman takes the blame for all the killings Harvey Dent has done against the mob, so that Harvey Dent can remain a martyr of justice. That he was the one that prosecuted 300 people on this very special day, and that Batman was the one that snapped and went crazy, going after the Joker and killed all these mob guys. All of that leads into The Dark Knight Rises, where you find out 8 years later, he basically retired after that night.
Yeah, and the big thing coming out of that's supposed to be the justification for his retirement, in part, is they call them the Dent Accords, right? Where they essentially, Gotham has, like, the strictest criminal justice laws in the country.
Like, there's no parole, or parole is at least very hard to get, because, again, there's still all these Arkham Asylum inmates running the streets from Batman Begins. You have all these mob guys running the streets still, and basically people are thrown in jail without parole.
I think thematically, this is where we're going to disagree. Because to me, that opening is, well, not the opening, because the opening is Bane, who is like this international terrorist, is how they're portraying him.
Yeah, he's like they call him the mercenary in the beginning,
Right.
and you get the very famous meme scene of Bane and the CIA agent, which was all over 4chan for like 4 years.
And it has my least favorite line in any of the
Every least favorite line. For you.
Oh my god. I can't. I love The Dark Knight Rises, and every time I watch it, I want to throw something at the screen. Like, it just killed. It's just like, oh, come on. Why did we do that? But, so we get this, and Bane has the most elaborate plan in the history of plans to get out of the plane.
Yeah. They have to leave a guy behind, even though they're already taking the doctor, so the doctor wouldn't be in the crash.
The fire rises.
The fire rises. For you.
So after this, we learn all this about the Dent Accords, and now Gotham, and this to me is something that I really like. This idea that, you know, the whole point of this was Batman didn't want to have to exist after Harvey Dent. He thought Harvey Dent was the key. Because of Harvey Dent's martyrdom, they put in these laws that are completely unreasonable. And you now have a Gotham that in a way is as corrupted as it was before, because now you've just put all the power in another spot. Instead of the criminals running everything, you now have like police that can pretty much do whatever they want.
I don't agree with that on like a plot level. What I disagree with is how they enacted within the story, because they kind of just gesture at a lot of these ideas. You don't see like the police manhandling people. This was kind of also the same time, well, not the same time, this is during the quote-unquote Great Recession. Batman The Dark Knight came out like the year the stock market crashed. And this is 4 years after that, so there's a lot of references to like economics and things like that. All of that I'm perfectly fine with. What I find weird is like, you don't see cops like manhandling these people. You don't see like somebody getting denied parole despite being like a perfect citizen in jail.
But I think, to me, that's part of the point, is because it's not about corruption on that type of level. It's not that, police brutality. It's police state. It's the idea that no one's gonna like fuck up in the streets because you're never getting out of jail. And it doesn't need to be that strong, because it also allows the police then to retain what they'll need for the end of the movie. Where, like, you don't have to hate the police officers. The problem is the system. The problem is that the system has become something it shouldn't have in reaction to what happened to Harvey Dent.
But the problem is, like, I don't think they do a good job of, like, visualizing that system or showing that system. Like, compared to The Dark Knight, where just having the bat signal and seeing the criminals going away for the night, that said a lot. You don't get the same thing here. You don't get, like, Selina Kyle being persecuted for some weird other thing, even though she starts the film breaking in and steal Bruce Wayne's fucking mother's pearls.
Well, that would be... See, I think that still works with that concept, because now you're making this idea of criminals upping their game, where, like, you would need a cat burglar in, like, that society, because you'd have to not get caught. Like, you have to not get caught. It's weird. It's a weird commentary. But I think it all feeds into something that's like an even bigger idea, which is the city has now proven that it's wrong to go against the path kind of laid out by Batman.
Because this also ties into like what happens with Wayne Industries and everything, because you find out that in just like 7 years the entire company is on the verge of collapsing. And then they just get rid of Bruce Wayne for like half the movie too after that, so it doesn't really even matter.
But that's like where... Because, all right. Before we move forward, though, let's just kind of like go through the plot of this movie, because it's
a lot.
It's a lot, and it's different. It's a different flow than The Dark Knight. So we open on the bizarre Bane, most elaborate escape from the CIA ever.
Which is a cool action scene, but the dialogue just makes no sense.
Yeah.
You're a big guy.
For you! Wait, no, I don't even know.
No, that's what... For you.
Bane gets out. Bane is some kind of mercenary guy. Then we go back to Gotham. We learn about the Dentaccords, which have given police like an insane amount of power, like no parole, which has seemingly made the city a safer place, but subtext-wise probably has them in a great deal of fear of being caught for doing anything.
Yeah, later on it becomes like a very class thing where like the lower classes are kind of burgeoning for justice against the police, and that gets manipulated later on. Bruce Wayne is holding a big party for the 7th anniversary of Harvey Dent's martyrdom. And that's where Gordon thinks about revealing the truth about that night. He eventually decides against it. He had a whole speech written out, and he puts it in his pocket. He talks to a couple people, and he gets threatened about being pushed out.
Yeah, Gordon, it seems like, it is portrayed as being the last thing keeping all of this power from really going to shit, and having just people who are seeking power try to take over the police in Gotham, who, as we said, are extremely powerful. This is paralleled with Selina Kyle, the Catwoman, finding Bruce Wayne, realizing he's just like a beat-up middle-aged dude, and stealing stuff from him.
And then just getting away because Bruce doesn't prosecute him. This is kind of where he starts doing some minor Batman thing.
He's got a little Batman-y at this point.
But he doesn't really get super involved with it. During this time, Gordon is investigating some of the tunnels because he starts getting suspicious about what's going on in the underground because he finds bodies, mainly orphans. So Gordon enlists the help of John Blake to investigate the tunnels. He is also an orphan, who was an orphan rather, and he talks to the other orphans from his orphan home because he's an orphan. And they find...
This orphanage also funded by the Wayne Foundation.
Wayne, yeah, which is another plot point. He finds out that people from the orphanage, because they're orphans, are going to the tunnels to find work of some kind. And it's very dirty work. And they don't know quite what it is. They just know people get money when they go into the tunnels. So John Blake and Gordon Ramsay go into the... Gordon Ramsay.
Commissioner Gordon Ramsay.
And so John Blake and Commissioner Gordon go into the tunnels to investigate, and that's where they find Bane. And Bane gets in the shootout with Gordon, and Gordon escapes barely with his life. But Bane finds the speech he had written for the night before at the Wayne Foundation charity ball, because he goes through his pockets while he's, kidnapped. But Gordon escapes, he realizes that he lost his speech, and then Bane reads the speech, and he realizes all the stuff about Harvey Dent.
He's like, ooh, this is interesting.
Because of this, John Blake then goes to Bruce Wayne, because Gordon tells him he can't trust Bruce Wayne about this, that there's a big problem on the horizon. John Blake goes to Bruce Wayne, and he's like, hey, I know you're Batman, can you help?
Yeah.
And he's like, yeah, I'm kind of surprised you know I'm Batman, but I'll help. And that's when Bruce Wayne goes into full Batman mode. He gets, robotic legs and things like that. And he's...
Which are an extension of the technology from Dark Knight, though.
Yeah, it's a very, late Batman thing, which I like. I was about to say I don't disagree with. And then during this time, Bane goes into the stock market, and he hacks the stock market and starts selling a bunch of stocks in other people's names. And then you find out that he's also being funded by somebody on the Wayne Foundation chairman's, because there's still a board of chairs on the Wayne Foundation, even though it's on the verge of collapsing, because Bruce Wayne spent all his money on a nuclear reactor that was going to save the world because it was going to be an infinite source of power. At the same time, there's a lot of moving gears in this movie. A woman named Miranda Tate is trying to get Bruce Wayne's attention. She's mostly unsuccessful, but after this whole big stock market thing, Bruce Wayne starts going to these charity balls to find out what's going on with his foundation and what's happening with all the stock market stuff.
And he's also Batmaning a lot, so his testosterone's probably up.
Yeah, and he's kind of flirting with Selena Kyle because he finds Selena Kyle at this meeting, and she tells him, oh, there's a storm coming, Bruce Wayne. Yeah. And she says all this stuff about how the rich people are gorging on the poor and things like that.
Which, the funny part is, you're given the impression is, kind of true.
They're eating, crabs and things like that. There's, a very fancy bowl. There's, rose petals flowing everywhere. But because of this, Bruce Wayne figures out that he needs to go into the tunnels. So he goes into the tunnels, and that's where he fights Bane, because Selena Kyle leads him to Bane, because she doesn't want to get killed by the Bane.
She's still a bad Catwoman.
Yeah. And she basically sells him out to save her life because they kind of catch on that Bruce Wayne is catching on. And that's where we have the really cool action scene where Bruce Wayne gets his back broken by Bane.
Which, is our nod to Nightfall. And I say that right now because I think this is going to be important once we get through this plot. Nightfall, huge event run for Batman.
So because his back is broken, he is then taken to Uzbekistan and thrown in a hole.
But it's like a prison.
It's a prison. It's basically prison. It's basically supposed to be the Bane's prison from all the comics, but they do a very Nolan twist on that.
Which is also kind of a tip-off of what's about to happen with Bane's origins.
Yes.
And also is very similar to the shaft that Bruce falls down when he is a child.
It's supposed to be very symbolic. So because of all of this, before Bruce Wayne even went to the tunnels, he told Miranda Tate that she can take charge of the nuclear reactor he just has hidden underneath the entire city. Because he's afraid that it might fall into the wrong hands, but he trusts Miranda Tate because Lucius Fox trusts Miranda Tate because they're both on the board and they both speak to each other a lot. But now that Batman's in a hole in Uzbekistan, Bane takes over the city and he basically gets the nuclear reactor. He comes in. Somehow he finds out about it. You find out why later. But Bane's able to find out about this nuclear reactor, steal it, and he turns it into a bomb.
Right, and he also, what's a big part is he cuts off Gotham City from everything else.
Yeah, this happens at the same
Which
time.
also folds in a little bit of the Gotham earthquake, Contagion sort of era of Batman, where there's huge stories.
Like No Man's Land and everything.
Right,
too.
No Man's Land, a little Contagion, like just touches of these very grand Batman stories, which is significant because that's not really what the first two movies are.
So Bane steals his nuclear reactor, turns into a bomb because of the doctor he stole in the beginning of the film. He goes to Gotham Stadium, he blows up the stadium, and he takes the city hostage. But you find out he's not really taking the city hostage because he doesn't give the US government any demands. Instead, he reads out the speech Gordon wrote, and he frees everybody in prison, and he says, now there is no prison system, the civilians get to judge people. And they basically go into the rich's home, kill them, and judge them either on exile or death, which are kind of the same thing.
Right.
And
they forced them to walk across a frozen Gotham River, which is implicitly like the Hudson River, which... Yeah, that's death too. In case you did. If the three-eyed fish don't get you, you drown.
So he takes over the city, and he's killing cops, and he's letting civilians kill the rich left and right. But it's mostly implied that's mercenaries doing this. That is Bane's men trying to lie about that this is a much more bigger civilian thing than it actually is.
And like most totalitarian leaders, he says that it is the public judging everyone, but it's actually the Scarecrow.
Yeah, Scarecrow or his mercenaries. So, and then Bane, with the nuclear bomb he stole, he hides in between like 3 garbage trucks, and the garbage trucks drive throughout the city. And he tells the civilians of Gotham that he gave somebody the trigger, and with that trigger, they can blow up the bomb at any time. So that's how he holds the city hostage. He also blows up all the bridge so the army can't get in. And then he uses that detonation trigger of the nuclear bomb to keep the army out from invading. Because it says if the army ever invades, he will blow up the city. This then leads into Gordon leading like a resistance front where he's getting all the cops and other civilians together to track the trucks and try to find out which truck has the nuclear reactor in it. Unfortunately, they also find out at the same time, John Blake finds out that the nuclear reactor actually has a time limit on it, which is 30 days. After 30 days, it will then explode and destroy the city anyway. During all this, Batman's in the hole training to get better. His back is broken, and they fix his back by just like lifting him and like kicking him in the back a whole bunch.
And Bane also left this guy there to like antagonize him, kind of.
Yeah, they have a TV there showing Gotham falling into chaos because they want to not just break Batman's back, but his spirit too.
Which I think is my favorite thing that Bane does in the entire movie.
He just hires some guy.
He's like a guy who's gonna like nurse you back to health, but then like be real negative.
It's the doctor from earlier. and during all this, the doctor and the guy helping Bruce Wayne / Batman tells them about Bane's backstory. That there was a mercenary who had sex with some warlord's daughter, and the daughter got pregnant, and because of that, the mercenary was thrown into the hole. But the mercenary was then taken out of the hole and replaced with the wife who was pregnant, and then she had the kid in the hole. And that kid was then born in the hole, and some riot happens, and the kid escapes. And the mother dies in the hole, and then this kid is then raised by Ra's al Ghul, who turns out to be the father of this kid, who was also thrown into that hole, but was taken out of the hole and indoctrinated into the League of Shadows, or Assassins. I keep forgetting the name. But then they were excommunicated from the League of Shadows for being too extreme for whatever reason. And now they're back, and they have the city under control, and it's applied to be Bane at this point.
And I think this is one of the few things that has come out. I think there was like a deleted scene where they explained that Bane was beaten up so badly that he has to have like the constant...
No, that's in the movie.
Is it in the movie?
Yeah, but it's like they go by really quick. They don't.
I know
really
there's an extent. There is something because people have talked about it where there is a longer version of that explains it a lot more in detail.
They don't explain what the mask does. They say it keeps his face together, holds back the pain, but they don't show like how his face. I believe
the implication is supposed to be that he's constantly on like pumped in drugs to keep away from the pain, as opposed to a super. Steroid.
Or like keeping his jaw intact or whether it's implied to be some kind of drug. So now Bane is revealed to have been this kid that was a part of the League of Shadows. And Batman, being Batman, is determined to get out of the hole, and he does by letting go of his fear, which turned out to be the rope, metaphorically.
The biggest thematic thing in the entire movie is you have Batman is now absolutely, like, even though he's the only superhero, he is now, like, a superhero. He's now, like, a Justice League material, like, nothing can stop Batman.
No, yeah, he metaphorically rose from hell, and they say, oh, this is the fire rising from the pits of hell, so Batman will take his vengeance. So, despite all these bridges being blown up, all the tunnels being blocked, Batman gets into Gotham. And during this time, we also find out that Gordon has been leading resistance, and he's been slowly helping the police officers get out of the tunnels because they were trapped in the tunnels much, much earlier. Basically during the same time the stadium was exploded. But they also brought on Miranda Tate. And during this time, Miranda Tate, everything goes wrong. They blow up the one entrance they made for the police officers to get out. But Batman comes in and saves the day with his helicopter, basically. His fancy-ass helicopter.
It's the Bat.
The Bat.
It's like a...
Because he's Batman.
It's kind of a jet and kind of a heli... It's its own thing.
So now Batman's using his bat to blow holes in the tunnels to let the police officers out, and they all gather together to do one final fight against Bane. And they all march on Wall Street, basically, where Bane's hiding out, and they get into a big fight with Bane. And Batman and Bane punch each other a whole bunch, and Batman wins the fight. Bane is defeated.
But then...
he gets stabbed by Miranda Tate, who you find out all this time was the reason why the police were unable to escape the tunnels.
Because she's Talia al Ghul.
Yeah, she's been selling them out, and she's here to get revenge on Batman for killing her father, Ra's al Ghul. And Bane was actually just her protector. Talia al Ghul was the one that escaped the hole in the ground, and Bane was just the protector, but then they get Bane out of the hole in the ground. And now there's a big action scene where Miranda Tate takes the bomb, the nuclear reactor, and they chase after her.
There's a bunch of things that happen, but essentially Batman
gets the bomb, and he flies the bomb away from New York City, and the bomb explodes.
It's Gotham.
It's New York City.
Because some days, you just can't get rid of a bomb.
So everyone thinks Batman is dead because of the bomb, but one day, Alfred is out in Paris, having his yearly cup of coffee in Paris, and he sees Batman, Bruce Wayne is still alive, and he's living a happy life with Selina Kyle. And then,
like, there's always this debate of whether that's, like, Alfred fantasizing. I think it's not supposed to be, because you also then have John Blake, who you find out his real name is Robin.
Yeah, because he quits the police force because, he tried to get a bunch of children. He tried to get a bus full of orphans out of the city, and the army just wouldn't freaking let him.
Yeah, and he
had a bus full of orphans, and the army, the mean old army, was going to shoot him down with a bus full of orphans. Because...
But he's left in Bruce Wayne's will this bag.
Yes.
And within said bag is all the access to the Batcave.
Yeah, it shows on the location where the Batcave is, because... during all this, Batman and John Blake made a pretty close friendship, I think.
Yeah, I think, he's a good ally.
That's the whole plot. It's a lot of moving gears because there's a lot of, like, shifts. It's not as straightforward as Dark Knight or even Batman Begins.
So let's talk about what's important here, because that's one of the things with Dark Knight Rises, and I get why a lot of people don't like it very much. I still really do, because I think what it does is, first of all, you get, like, minor adaptations of, like, 3 or 4 things. You get a Nightfall that takes place after The Dark Knight Returns, which is kind of cool. It's like this weird, like, all right, why would Batman quit? Here's our reason Batman would quit. All right, why would he come back? It's Bane. Then Bane breaks him. But you get this idea of Batman being, like, unstoppable, which I guess is less intriguing to some people. But I like it here because I feel like it's the culmination of everything that was established in Batman Begins, that he has now literally it's gone from him not knowing what to do, to having a plan, to progressively building this idea of Batman to, like, a godlike level, where, like, Batman at the darkest hour of Gotham is going to show up. it also kind of pushes Bruce Wayne into a direction that isn't really present in the other two, where he is sort of beyond like a normal human. Like, and even the most planned person can't take down Batman. And even if Batman leaves, there's another Batman coming, which I think is more the point with John Blake. Even though John Blake ultimately is this weird, like, amalgamation of, like, every Robin.
Yeah.
Which is kind of cool in itself, where, like, he's got sort of the cop thing and, like, the attitude of Grayson. And he's also, like, the straight-up orphan that, like, Jason Todd was, so he's a little scrappy. But he's, like, smart like Tim Drake. I thought it was almost, like, I don't want to say dumb. Like, I don't have, like, a better word for it. Having his real name being Robin was literally, like, the most off-character thing, like, for Nolan in any of these movies. Like, that's what it felt like to me. Like, if he had just said he was John Blake, and, like we said, like, there's two ways to watch these. You can watch them for, like, the action, or you can start thinking about it hard. If you had just left that idea of John Blake in there, and him taking over the mantle, everyone would have figured out he was Robin.
I would have felt... I think that was probably a studio thing, because I think it was like... You could have just had his name been like Dick Grayson or something, and have him be like an amalgamation. And I think they didn't go with Dick Grayson because at this point it's 2012. People have an idea of what Dick Grayson is. And he was not a circus boy man.
Right. Circus boy man.
He was a cop man. So...
Cop man or circus man.
So I think they went with Robin just to like be very clear about it, and I can't help but feel that's like a studio thing to be like, who is this guy? And they're like, it's Robin. Let's just get it out of the way. It's Robin. Let's just clear the room, clear the air.
I mean, like, I don't know. I feel like they probably weren't. It seems like they kind of let Nolan do what he wants to do. To me, it just seems like a slight misstep in what was otherwise like fairly straightforward. I thought naming Talia's, like, alter ego Miranda was really funny because I'm pretty sure that's a reference to the 60s Batman single of Batman singing to Miranda about how he's going to take off his mask.
I didn't even think of that.
Same thing with the bomb, I think a little bit. I don't know if it was 100% intentional, but certainly carrying around the bomb sitting, not knowing where to put it. That's a bit more of a stretch. But the Miranda thing is funny. It's a true trilogy, at least, because it comes, like, full circle. Where, like, the things that you start in the beginning, you close out. And you get your main character to the point that you were theorizing they could get in the first one. It also leaves Gotham in this, like, perpetual state of worship of Batman, whomever that is. Or, like, anyone who would follow Batman would now be seen differently. And they would know not to make the mistakes that they had in the past. They also redeem the police force at the end. Where, like, now the police force are literally joining Batman in the war on crime, where instead of it being, like, contentious relationship as it normally was, except for Gordon, you now have the police force as, like, an army being led by Batman. So, like, Batman is now what justice means in Gotham.
Like I kind of alluded earlier, I think where it falls apart is Nolan's visual storytelling, which is normally very good with, because, like I said, we don't see a whole lot of cops, like, abusing their power. There's one instance where the guy who's gunning for a commissioner chases after Batman instead after Bane, which is like that movie's car sequence, which is really elaborate because there's like a million cop cars all over the city just chasing Batman.
It's also shot over 3 cities.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it goes from like LA to Chicago to I think New York.
It feels pretty seamless. I have to give you credit for that.
If you watch it, if you know the skylines from different cities, it's actually kind of mind blowing.
But that's the only, like, hint of corruption. You don't really see people, like, being denied parole for anything, like, minor. There's a lot of ideas about, like, the wealthy eating Gotham, but, like, the only wealthy person we know is Bruce Wayne, and he's, like, losing all his money. And then his mansion gets, like, foreclosed on. But Selena kind of makes a snide comment that's like, oh, you're betting your house against a bank, like, not even rich people become poor. But then that doesn't really get explored because he gets thrown into a hole. There's stuff about, like, Bruce Wayne quitting Wayne because he couldn't get the nuclear reactor to work properly. There's, like, a lot of different gears, and I feel like this is a culmination of, like, a lot of the small problems Nolan has had throughout his films, all kind of, like, colliding with each other.
I would almost... I get what you're saying, and I don't think a lot of it's overt. I would disagree with some of it. I think the whole idea of, like, the rich, like, eating the city... It's supposed to be because Gordon is still in power at that time that he's trying to keep things in balance, but he can't because they're trying to pretend like nothing's wrong and eating whatever they want and buying whatever they want. And it's not the situation. And like everyone is like hailing Harvey Dent for like what he did. But what Harvey Dent did is not the world they live in now. Like it's not what he was trying to accomplish. It's not what anyone was trying to accomplish. I think it's okay to just imply that and then have Bane's attack be that clarification that things are completely wrong. Like it's an exaggeration of the idea, which would have been really prevalent as the script was being written, that this sort of fake stability that existed. And then once one thing went wrong, the balloon popped. Now everything just collapses because the infrastructure isn't there.
That's true, but he also literally puts all the cops in a tunnel and just closes the tunnel.
Right, but that's where I think it does work thematically, because now you're using the extreme example. Now you are visualizing the metaphor. Like, Bane is the metaphor. Like, Bane's attack is where you do get it, even though you didn't quite get it before.
I guess, but like, if we're to believe, like, the prisoners in the prisons of Gotham are being unfairly prosecuted, then why is Bane releasing all the prisoners seen as, like, a very clear bad thing? Because then all the houses start getting looted, people are then being murdered, people are then, like the whole thing falls apart. Like,
because neither are right. Because it's neither extreme is the correct extreme.
But we're not seeing anything in the middle, is my point.
We are seeing something in the middle. It's Batman.
He's in a hole in the ground.
Well, he comes back later, though. It's Batman correcting the situation.
I suppose. But then he creates a system with like a fucking helicopter that blows walls open.
But
like,
that's Batman then. But that's your action element. That's where this is ridiculous. Like, it's already ridiculous.
But like, that's where it falls apart for me, because it's trying to be like really clever about these ideas about like economic injustice. And even then it didn't play super well because there was a lot of like sour attitude about it. This still is. But now we have films like Parasite and Joker that more directly talk about this class thing happening. And I think this is where the movie stumbled with it, because they aren't able to really like explore it, because I think that's just how Nolan operates. Like even in Interstellar and Inception, like a lot of his way of exploring ideas are through action scene. And I don't think that was the best way to approach this, especially when it's trying to be so heady about it.
I don't disagree with that. I think obviously if you're going to comment on it and you want to comment at length, yeah, you want a movie like Parasite, you want a movie like Joker, where you can discuss it through the actions of the film. I think that's where it kind of doesn't matter, though, because then the point ultimately is supposed to be Batman is the correct way, and now we're on this, like, super Batman. This is, like, ultimate Batman coming in, save the day, and that is an action story, and it is a little ridiculous, and it doesn't quite address the issue directly, but that's okay in my head, because of what it is.
But then, like, the correct way is, again, like Batman flying a bomb out of the city and he blows up a building just because it's in his way.
But his presence is, like I said, he's becoming this, he is this, like, messianic figure. So, like, his intervention is the philosophical thing, which is a stretch, but that's superheroes.
I guess it just stretches me too hard, because you are right. Batman puts up that symbol on the bridge, and then that's when the cop earlier, I guess, who was also gunning for commissioner, decides to join in, and he's the one leading the charge.
I guess, like, the way I would summarize as quickly as I can is, if The Dark Knight is about the idea of Batman impacting things and people committing to this idea, Dark Knight Rises is about the idea being true. Like, it's not just an idea. Like, Batman is going to save you. It's not just something to scare criminals anymore. It's the truth.
Yeah, Northman points that out, too. Like, Batman's flying the bomb. Batman's here to save us.
Right.
Okay.
But even, like, that's, like... But that's my point is, yeah, it's a little... I don't want to say, like, counter-intellectual. It's not realistic in, like, a base sense, but I think that's the point. That Batman is now at that point of not being realistic. That Batman is beyond this. He is not just an idea, but a force.
Yeah, but then it's tied into all these ideas about, like, the lies Gordon told and, like, the unfair police state, the unfair economics, like, even the army being unfair. like all this unfairness doesn't really get explored, and that's where like I think they were trying to go for something epic with adapting Nightfall, but it probably would have been better served by like adapting something like Hush or Court of Owls or something where there's a very much more like concrete presence, because like even though Batman's fighting Bane, who's like a metaphor, Bane gets taken out by Catwoman on a bike very like unceremoniously. And Bane was built up to be the villain this entire time, and he immediately gets like thrown out the window for Talia al Ghul's like weird garbage truck chase scene.
See, for me that works though, because that's another like proof of the Batman thing is Bane is a lie, Batman is the truth.
But Batman's a lie too, because he took a lie for all these other things that he didn't do.
But not anymore. Now that's over. It's about progression. It's about this thing where he felt that's what he had to do, right? And that's where The Dark Knight ends. And that's a very like grounded, realistic idea. We're now out of that realm. We're now going into, no, it wasn't right because it wasn't the truth. It has to be the truth, and the truth is Batman's coming to save you.
I think they could have just like plotted it better, because like even recapping it, there's a lot of like moving gears and like a lot of like subplots that all don't really like tie together. Like there was really no reason for Selina Kyle to be in that movie.
I would agree with that. I think you don't get their relationship to develop enough to really warrant the ending you get with them. That's in everyone's head who's read like Batman comics, that like, oh, he's going to end up with Catwoman.
Right.
That's probably where that came from, to be honest. I would agree. Like, you could entirely cut Catwoman from that movie. It would make no difference. I think Blake is important to the way the movie moves, and I think pushing that idea of, like I was saying, like, you know, Batman being beyond just the idea that, yes, the idea is inspiring, but this is well beyond that. But I still really like it, because I think it's this, to me, it's a straight line through the three movies. And I will 100% say Dark Knight is the best of the three, because it ends up the most effective. I think if you're going to be real academic, Batman Begins is probably the best made, like top to bottom, because it's just constructed really well. You don't run into those like kind of, you know, as you were saying, like Nolan getting ahead of himself a little bit, like he does in Dark Knight, where he's moving really fast. He doesn't do that so much in Begins, because I think they know they have to get it done, and like they were probably a little more scared.
I think it was also Goyer's influence, because he was actually the only one like credited with the script in that one.
Right. I think Rises, you know, like Nolan is a lit guy.
Like on fire?
No, he's lit. No, you know,
like literature.
Literature, yeah. That's what I saw in Dark Knight Rises. Is like, no, this isn't like the best Batman movie. No, there are a lot of things that could be fixed, but I think ultimately it achieves what it's supposed to, and I like it.
Yeah, I just would have preferred that they picked like one path instead of like opening all these other paths. Like, is it a movie about Bruce Wayne trying to rebuild the city? Is it a movie about Bruce Wayne getting up after becoming bankrupt? Is it about like class warfare? Is it about, you know, unfair police tactics? All these other things. I don't feel like it pits a path, and that's why it feels so messy in the end.
I would agree that's why it feels messy. I think that it does deliver the answer it's going to deliver.
But because of The Dark Knight Rises, surprisingly, even though that was like 8 years ago, this movie still has an influence, and most recently had influence on the DC films, which were all kind of based off of the Nolan stuff, though with Scott Snyder's influence.
Yeah, and I think what's funny is a lot of what, you know, we were talking about where Nolan started moving away from like the groundedness and maybe the darkness that would permeate Dark Knight Rises that ultimately doesn't, I think kind of comes out in Batman vs. Superman. You know, it's almost like a separate path, except it's a world where like Superman's flying around, which is the whole point. But Nolan's influence hasn't gone away. Judging from what little has leaked of the Batman, which is shooting right now, I don't think it's going away completely at all. Though there is a distinct attempt to move away from some of the designs that have come out with that. I think it's an important version of Batman. I think it's always going to be influential because it is a seminal version of Batman.
Well, it introduced like tech into superheroes, introduced this idea of being able to imply plot lines, which is still a thing superheroes movies struggle with, especially with studio interference and all these other things. But Dark Knight Rises also came out in a weird time where we were pretty deep into the Marvel Universe. So this came out in like 2012, right when the Avengers came out. So all this idea of like being able to build cinematic universe and The Dark Knight Rises just ending a cinematic universe is still very strange.
Right, yeah, it is kind of this weird break where, you really had, with the huge success of The Dark Knight, and then, the repeated successes of Marvel, I feel like everyone kind of thought like everything was going to go in kind of a similar direction. Mm. And then, like you said, like Rises ends. And it has like a cliffhanger ending, but I don't know what, like, when I first saw it even, I was just like, they're not going any further than this. Like, there's not going to be a John Blake movie. There's not going to be, like some kind of weird Robin thing. This is it. They're going to do something else. And Marvel's still moving forward. And Marvel, regardless of either our opinions, like, I like Rises more than Christian does. But neither of us can say that the Marvel stuff wasn't 100% more digestible.
Oh, no, absolutely. Like, even watching, like, Batman Begins, I was shocked to see, like, Bruce Wayne dealing with tech, Bruce Wayne actually, like, grappling with all these weird ideas about justice and everything. Like, that's still not present in, like, Marvel movies to this day. At most, you get, like, commentary about family and, like, Thor and Ragnarok, Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2. Like, that's about as far as, like, Marvel movies take it.
And then, when you came and you go into the, 2 times Batman has shown up since The Dark Knight Rises, which are in the, Batman vs. Superman and then whatever we want to call Justice League.
Yeah, but that feels more Superman focused than anything else, though.
Batman vs. Superman?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know. I think it's a different type of exploration, and I think part of the reason the reaction was so bad to it was people got used to that lighter Marvel look at it. I think if you didn't have that influence on culture and we went from Dark Knight Rises into Batman vs. Superman, or like, in some way, I think there would be actually a really different view of that movie.
There might be. If you came into this right after Dark Knight Rises or something, then I think you would have a pretty much more justifiable version. Because like we said, Dark Knight Rises just ended an entire like cinematic universe.
But then, and that was sort of the intention. Nolan never wanted it to be associated with anything else, which is supposedly why Bale like turned them down to do anything after.
Well, it also feels like Nolan was sick of doing these and he wanted to do his own movies again. And
which have been good.
Yeah, but he had a fight to make Inception and like, Interstellar, which is like insane to me.
All right, well, we've talked a lot about the Nolan trilogy here. In large part, explaining the plots to the last 2. But, there's a lot to unpack, and we hope that we did some of that for you. As always, give us thumbs up, subscribe, 5 stars, comment, share, do everything you possibly can. We're on pretty much all relevant social media, and occasionally Vero. Occasionally. Have to catch up on our website updates there to get back on Vero, because they don't let you link to the show. It's a little annoying. Yeah. But please do follow us wherever you can find us. Just type in Dissecting Fiction. We'll pop up. I'm Vinny Murphy.
I'm Christian Cutler.
And thanks for listening.